Hello again, treasure hunters. Matt Brewer, the Logic Chaser, with vlog number 6. Practical application, my search logic for boots on the ground. We have a lot to cover with this one, and hopefully you can get some real value out of it. All right, so a specific disclaimer for this particular vlog. I'm trying to keep these relatively short and to the point, so I'll make statements that are built upon prior vlogs. So if something I say doesn't make sense and I'm kind of glossing over it, it's probably explained in those vlogs. Or if you say, where exactly did you hear that, Logic Chaser? It's probably explained in those vlogs. And stop talking to yourself. I can't hear you. Secondly, this is my process, and only Forrest knows if it's viable or not. And in fact, it's far more likely that I'm off on at least a few components in this process than it is to believe that I'm 100% right. That being said, I think that there are some good logic points here that have led up to this process, and I've spent several hundred hours getting to this point, so I hope that you can get some value out of it. All right, so building on the prior logic, here's a statement from Forrest. They figure out the first two clues, but they don't get the third and fourth, and they go right past the treasure chest. So logically, what I believe this means is that clues 3 through 9 are in very close proximity to each other, because if I arrive at clue number 3 but don't recognize it for being clue number 3, then I'll just go ahead and walk right by the treasure, right? So that makes good sense, I think. And then, since the clues are contiguous and there's no distance that's implied in the poem, like too far to walk is an implied distance between the where warm waters halt and the too far to walk in the canyon down. Now, since there's no distance implied between too far to walk and the home of Brown, so here and here, that's very likely to mean that there's not very much distance at all between the spot that is too far to walk in the canyon down and the home of Brown. They're probably very close together. And so this drawing is obviously not to scale, so this would really be more like right there. But I've obviously made this map bigger so we can kind of get the overall perspective and have the rest of the clues on here. But so here's the theory. If I can put an X on the map, that is the place that's too far to walk in the canyon down. The home of Brown should be found nearby. So how do we do that? Okay, so how do we find a spot that's 10 miles in the canyon below or downstream below a place that is where warm waters halt? So Google Earth is one option, and I'd say it's a good option, but I like Google Maps better. And if there's one thing I've become very proficient at over the years, it's using Google Maps. Okay, so let's take a quick example. Forrest said, and in his preface to Too Far to Walk, I put a small rubber dinghy in the Madison River a few miles from West Yellowstone, Montana, and fished downstream to Baker's Hole. The river distance was about 10 miles, and the best fishing was in the bends where the water turned deepish green and beautiful. So can we roughly, from this description, can we roughly find where Forrest put in into the Madison River based upon that statement? based upon his preference there. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how I do this. And for some of you, this is probably something that you've been doing the whole time, but we'll try and go through it anyway. So Baker's Hole is Baker's Hole Campground right there, West Yellowstone. All right, so now we got Baker's Hole, and we know that he was fishing downstream to Baker's Hole. So this is the ending point, and somewhere about 10 river miles upstream is where he put in. So can we figure out roughly where that spot was? So if I just go like this and I right click and then I go down to measure distance and do that, what I've done is I've put a marker right here, and then I can draw a line and it will connect those waypoints together, or breadcrumbs together, and give me rough miles. So if I'm just looking at this from the rough estimate, I'm at about 8.41 miles here. Now, I'll spare you the time that it takes to demonstrate the whole process, but let me show you what I do here if I want to figure out what that spot is pretty accurately. So I start from here, and again I right click and I go to measure distance, and then I just trace the path of the Madison River, and now I'm working upstream. Question is, how do I know I'm working upstream? Well, there's two ways I can know, and one of them you're kind of seeing right here. I have turned on here, I've turned on terrain. It will normally come up in map, which looks like that, which won't show me the topology. But if I go to terrain, it's going to give me at least some basic contours. What this helps me do is also find the canyons. So if I take a look here, there's clearly a canyon, and you can see that canyon coming down here, and it becomes really visible here, and you see the lines showing on you have to get just to the right level, and that's 7,000, 7,200, and so forth. So I can tell from just looking at this that this, where it's right down by the river, is what, 6,800 feet right there. So if I go this way and I look at what's at the river level, I can probably find it right here. I'm at 6,600 right there. So I know that the water is flowing, the Madison River is flowing from the east to the west, roughly. Okay? The other way you can do it very quickly is switch into satellite mode and find an island. That old, used to be an old Dolly Parton song, Islands in the Stream. Well, that's what you're looking for. You're actually looking for the islands in the stream. I'll try to see if I can find one that's pretty clear cut. There we go. What you'll see generally with the islands in the stream, the water as it moves in this direction will form a blunt side to the island and a skinny tail. All right? So I can tell in the Madison River that the water flow is going, I'm confirming my water flow very quickly if I have islands in my stream. I'm looking for the blunt side of the island. The tail that's long and skinny will be on the down river side or the downstream side of the island. Particularly important. So let's switch back into the terrain mode. We're taking a look at this again. And so you can clearly see the canyons. That's a key point. So you got your topology, you've got your way to map out exactly what is 10 river miles. Now, a key thing to understand too here, let me bring back up the presentation. Okay, so what I did here was I went ahead and mapped out and took a screenshot of all of the spots where I'm following the river, and I'm following it, whoops, I'm following it all the way back to the 10-mile mark. So as the crow flies, this distance to here to here is only a few miles, but when it traces the whole path of the river, just like what Forrest said in the preface, he said, I put a small rubber dinghy in the Madison River a few miles from West Yellowstone, Montana, and fished downstream to Baker's Hole. The river distance was about 10 miles and the best fishing. Okay. So now we can find roughly where Forrest put in, because I backtracked from the ending and found about 10 river miles. Okay, so back to, and I promise this is all going to tie in here in just a second. So when I come down here, this is the spot that 10 river miles comes out to be. So somewhere in this general area is pretty darn close, based upon Forrest's description of where he put in his rubber dinghy and started fishing downstream. So now we know how to get to 10 river miles below where warm waters halt, or we can work backwards. Either way, we're tracing the path of the river. Okay? There's another key point here to make, and that is, so we were already talked about turning on the terrain view and maps. And it's also possible to do the same type of thing in Google Earth, but it's a lot more complex, and you gotta do more things to easily mark your waypoints and places to check out. And I generally think it's a better process to use Google Maps than Earth, and it's a lot less resource intensive too. You can also download maps in advance in Google Maps, so that if you're offline, you can still use maps, like if you're out in the wilderness or something far away from a cell tower. Okay, and we can use that measure distance tool to follow the flow of the river. We talked about that. The snaky rivers like the Madison have changed course several times. And so what you can do is zoom out in the terrain mode and look for the canyons marked with vegetation, to find the high benches that mark the prior river courses. Actually, not in, that's an error. Zoom out in not terrain mode, but in regular satellite mode. And when you do that, what you'll see, okay, all right, this one is pretty obvious. If I can get the right perspective on it. All right, so this is one of the things I look for when I'm out gold prospecting. I'm looking for high benches, or where the water used to flow, like a dry river bed, or evidence of the river once flowing on a different course. And right there, what I'm doing is I'm seeing, at this level, I'm seeing this path right here, that goes down and around and then eventually undulates through all the way down to here, where it joins back. It looks like it joins back the flow, the current flow of the Madison River. So I can see the old path of the river. And Forrest alludes to this several times in his memoirs, where he talks about, the Madison River used to flow here, but it no longer flows. Sorry about that. Dog's going crazy. All right. Let's go back to the presentation. All right. So let's put it all together to maximize our boots on the ground. And here is my process. First thing I do is I mark several candidate where warm water halt on Google Maps that have passed my proof that I outlined in one of my first videos, or one of my first vlogs. It's called The Proof of Where Warm Waters Halt. And for me, the where warm waters halt has to have a canyon below it or very near to that where warm waters halt. If there's no canyon by it, there's no sense in going down that rabbit hole. It also must have a river in that canyon, because he says it's 10 river miles. So what I do is I do a rough estimate line measure, like a straight line measure of the river, if possible. With a river like the Madison, where it's very snaky, then it's going to be pretty difficult to get a good idea of what 10 river miles are, because it twists and turns so much. So what I'm looking for generally is I'm looking to see at that 10-mile straight line measure, does it generally flow into private land or an Indian reservation, or does it not have any creek intersections? If it doesn't have any creek intersections, or it flows into at a roughly the straight line 10-mile mark, it flows into an Indian reservation, for example, I'm not even going to go there because I don't think it's there. Okay, so I can eliminate that off my list. This is my process. If there are creek intersections that are close to the 10-mile straight line measure, then I trace out the path to the river like what I showed you before, which is much more precise because I'm following the twists and turns of the river. If a creek intersection turns out to be, once I've mapped out the actual river miles following the course of the river, is between 9.5 and 10.5 river miles in the canyon down, and there is parking within about a half mile of that creek, I mark that place in Google Maps. And finally, I go boots on the ground and drive to the marked spots. I thoroughly search for the home of brown where these places are that I've marked that are places where I'd park my car. If it's possible to use a drone, and you may have seen me on Gypsy's Kiss a time or two, I've talked about using a drone where it's possible, but not necessarily to look for the treasure directly. I'm much more likely to use my drone to get a better view to see if I can find the home of brown. Okay? And finally, if there is a home of brown in near proximity to where you've parked and it's not visible on Google Maps or Google Earth, well, then message me immediately and tell me exactly where you are. Okay. Or not. Or look for no place for the meek in very close proximity. If you are in the right spot, the remaining clues, I would argue, are very likely to be all within a half-mile radius of where you parked your car. And if there is no Homer Brown to be found after a thorough search, move on to the next marked spot or go fishing. This is what I do. I go fishing for an hour or so. If there's no treasure, the idea is I might still have some good luck and bag some tasty trout. Let's see. Do I even have one? Maybe I have one. There you go. And just to show you that I'm not kidding.
You can see him in the water there. There he goes.
Ah, look at there, a little brook trout. Anyway. Thumbs up, like, comment, subscribe, etc. I really appreciate it. Special thanks to all the new subscribers, all the great comments on there. It's been fantastic. It's got me certainly thinking about my logic and making sure that it is sound. And I certainly appreciate your comments and questions and so forth. So next up, vlog number 7. What would Forrest do? I think you'll like it. As always, thanks for watching. Matt Brewer out.